Some wounds aren't made by enemies. Aloan Voss's mother had once whispered. The deepest ones come from the people who should have loved you. The memory drifted through Aloan's mind like a fading ember as freezing wind swept across Ravenhollow Pack. Snow swirled through the dark evening sky, gathering on her hair and shoulders until she looked less like a young woman and more like a forgotten statue left at the edge of the world. Iron chains circled her wrists, securing her to the massive wooden gate that marked the entrance to the Pack territory. The metal was cold enough to sting, but Aloan had stopped noticing hours ago. Pain had a strange way of becoming ordinary when it stayed long enough. Villagers passed through the gate, some carrying baskets, others returning from the market square before nightfall. Almost all of them glanced at her. Not one offered kindness. Their eyes slid over her, as if she were something shameful left on display. A warning. A lesson. A mistake everyone should avoid becoming. Aloan lowered her gaze and focused on the snow collecting at her feet. The white blanket covered the frozen ground inch by inch, softening everything it touched. She wished life worked the same way. She wished winter could bury humiliation the way it buried footprints. Unfortunately, some scars remained visible no matter how much time passed. 3 days earlier, she had still believed her future might be different. 3 days earlier, she had stood in the moon hall wearing the pale blue dress her mother had sewn before illness claimed her life. 3 days earlier, she had believed the bond she felt was real. Then Garrick Hale had looked directly into her eyes and rejected her before the entire pack. The memory still tightened around her chest. Not because she loved him. Deep down, she suspected she never truly had. What hurt was the silence afterward. The silence from neighbors who once smiled at her. The silence from people who had watched her grow up. The silence from those who decided that once a wolf was rejected, she no longer deserved compassion. Rejected Omega. The words had followed her everywhere since that day. Every whisper, every stare, every cruel laugh carried the same message. You do not belong. Aloan closed her eyes briefly. The wind carried voices from the center of the village where lanterns glowed against the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the distance, music played. Someone laughed. Life continued as though nothing had happened. As though a young woman wasn't standing chained to a gate while temperatures dropped below freezing. A group of teenagers approached from the village road. Their laughter quieted when they noticed her. One of the girls folded her arms and tilted her head. Still here? She asked. Another shrugged. Guess nobody wanted her. More laughter followed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Somehow that made it worse. They spoke as casually as people discussing weather. Aloan kept her eyes down. She had learned long ago that responding only encouraged them. Eventually the group moved on, disappearing into the snowfall. The silence returned. For a moment, Aloan allowed herself to imagine walking away. She pictured the mountains beyond Ravenhollow. The forest stretching for miles beneath moonlit skies. Places where nobody knew her name. Places where nobody cared whether she had been chosen or rejected. But dreams were dangerous. Dreams reminded you how trapped you really were. Her fingers tightened around the chain. Beneath the sleeve of her worn coat, something rested against her skin. A silver pendant hanging from a thin chain around her neck. The cracked moon-shaped necklace her mother had given her years ago. Aloan touched it instinctively. The metal felt warmer than usual. Strange. She frowned. The pendant had always been cold. Always silent. Her mother's final gift had never seemed remarkable despite the mysterious warning that came with it. Never remove it. No matter what happens. No matter who asks. Aloan had obeyed because it was the last thing she had left of her family. Nothing more. Yet now warmth pulsed gently beneath her fingertips. Once. Twice. Like a distant heartbeat. She glanced down. The pendant remained hidden beneath her coat, but the sensation lingered. Her breath caught. For a brief second, she thought she saw a faint silver glow beneath the fabric. Then it vanished. Aloan stared into the darkness beyond the gate. The forest stretched endlessly beyond the pack boundary, black trees swaying beneath the winter wind. Something felt different. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. A shiver ran through her, though this time it had nothing to do with cold. Somewhere far away, a wolf howled. The sound echoed across the mountains, deep and powerful enough to raise goosebumps along her arms. Another howl answered. Then another. The entire forest seemed to awaken. Villagers paused in the road. Conversations faded. Faces turned toward the northern horizon. Unease spread through the crowd. Aloan looked up slowly. She couldn't explain why, but her heart had begun racing. The pendant grew warmer against her skin. The pulse became stronger, steadier, almost alive. Snowflakes drifted through the air between her and the dark forest beyond the gate. For the first time all day, she forgot the chains around her wrists. Forgotten stories surfaced from childhood. Stories about kings and prophecies. Stories about wolves chosen by the moon goddess. Stories nobody believed anymore. Yet standing beneath the falling snow, with silver warmth spreading through the necklace her mother left behind, Aloan felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope. Not exactly. Something older. Something quieter. The feeling that her life was standing at the edge of a doorway she could not yet see. And somewhere beyond that doorway, destiny was finally beginning to wake up. The howl faded into the distance, but the uneasy silence that followed seemed even louder. Aloan Voss stood motionless beneath the gate as snow continued falling around her, each flake catching the lantern light before disappearing into the growing white blanket covering the village road. The strange warmth beneath her coat refused to fade. Instead, it spread through the silver pendant resting against her chest, flowing outward like gentle sunlight trapped beneath winter ice. Her fingers trembled as she touched the necklace again. The metal felt almost alive. For a moment, she considered pulling it free and examining it, but her mother's voice echoed through memory with startling clarity. Never remove it, no matter what happens. Aloan swallowed hard. The last time she had heard those words, she had been 10 years old. The memory returned so vividly that the snowy village around her seemed to disappear. She remembered a small cabin near the eastern forest. She remembered rain tapping softly against the windows. Most of all, she remembered her mother lying weak beneath layers of blankets while autumn wind rattled the roof overhead. Even then, her mother had smiled whenever Aloan entered the room. "Come here, little moonbeam," she had whispered. Aloan could still feel the gentle touch against her cheek. She could still see the silver necklace resting in her mother's palm. At the time it had looked ordinary. A cracked crescent moon hanging from a delicate chain. Nothing about it seemed valuable. Nothing about it suggested mystery or destiny. Yet her mother's expression had been unusually serious. "Promise me something," she had said. "Anything," young Aloan had replied. "If the day comes when people turn away from you, if they tell you that you do not belong, if they try to convince you that you are less than they are, you must remember who you are." Aloan had frowned. "What if I do not know who I am?" Her mother's eyes had glistened with emotion. "Then this will help you find your way." She had placed the necklace around Aloan's neck and closed her fingers over it. "Do not remove it." "Why?" "Because one day it will matter." The memory dissolved as a cold gust swept through Raven Hollow. Aloan blinked and found herself staring once more at the snow-covered road. Her chest tightened. Her mother had never explained what she meant. She had passed away only weeks later, taking her secrets with her. For years Aloan had assumed the necklace carried sentimental value and nothing more. Now she was not so certain. The warmth intensified again. A faint pulse traveled through the chain. Once, twice, 3 times, almost like a heartbeat. Aloan glanced around nervously. No one seemed to notice. Villagers continued moving between the square and the market road. Lanterns glowed warmly in distant windows. Life carried on, yet something had changed. She could feel it. Somewhere beyond the village, hidden beyond miles of forest and mountains, something was moving. She did not know how she knew. She simply did. Footsteps crunched through fresh snow nearby. Aloan looked up as Brielle Thornheart approached with 2 companions trailing behind her. Brielle wore a thick white cloak trimmed with silver fur and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Her perfect smile appeared the moment she spotted Aloan. "Still standing?" Brielle asked sweetly. "I suppose that is impressive." Her friends laughed softly. Aloan remained silent. Experience had taught her that Brielle was most dangerous when she sounded kind. "You know," Brielle continued, brushing snow from her sleeve, "the Winter Moon Festival begins tomorrow night. Everyone important will be there." She tilted her head slightly. "Well, almost everyone." More laughter followed. Aloan stared past her toward the dark forest. Refusing to react was the only victory she had left. Brielle's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Then her gaze dropped to the chain around Aloan's neck. Something flickered in her eyes. Curiosity, concern, perhaps even recognition. "That necklace," Brielle said quietly. "Where did you get it?" Aloan felt the pendant grow unexpectedly hot against her skin. Instinctively, she covered it with her hand. Brielle's expression sharpened immediately. "Interesting." Before Aloan could respond, A horn echoed from somewhere beyond the northern ridge. Long, deep, powerful. Every conversation in the village stopped. Heads turned toward the horizon. Even Brielle looked startled. Another horn sounded. Then a third. Eloan felt her heartbeat quicken. The pendant pulsed so strongly now that she could feel it through her coat. Snow drifted from the dark sky while an unfamiliar sense of anticipation settled over Raven Hollow. Whatever was coming, it was coming fast. And for the first time in years, the future felt larger than the walls people had built around her. The horns echoed again, rolling across the snow-covered valley like distant thunder. Every wolf in Raven Hollow knew that sound. It was not a hunting party. It was not a merchant convoy. It was a royal signal. The realization spread through the village faster than wildfire. Doors opened. Lanterns appeared in windows. Conversations erupted across the square. Eloan watched the sudden transformation from her place beside the gate. Moments ago, most people had ignored her existence. Now they hurried past without even looking her way, consumed by excitement and anxiety. Somewhere near the center of town, a bell began ringing. Once, twice, then continuously. The Winter Moon Festival had not officially begun, yet the village already felt like it stood at the center of something enormous. Brielle Thornhart remained where she was, her gaze fixed toward the northern road. Her earlier confidence had faded. The royal procession was not supposed to pass through here until next month, one of her friends whispered. Then why are they coming now? The other asked nervously. Brielle did not answer. Instead, her eyes drifted briefly toward Eloan before returning to the horizon. That look unsettled Eloan more than she wanted to admit. It was not hatred. It was not mockery. It was worry. As if Brielle had suddenly remembered something she wished she could forget. Snow continued falling, covering the village roofs in silver. The strange warmth inside Eloan's necklace intensified again. She pressed a hand against it. The pulse was stronger now. Rhythmic. Steady. Alive. The sensation spread through her chest and down her arms, bringing an unfamiliar sense of calm. It should have frightened her. Instead, it felt strangely comforting, like a voice whispering that she only needed to hold on a little longer. The village square filled rapidly. Residents gathered beneath banners decorated with moon symbols and pack colors. Children ran through the snow while adults discussed the royal arrival in hushed voices. Lanterns illuminated the growing crowd. Yet despite all the excitement, Eloan noticed something else. People kept glancing toward her, not because they cared, because she was still there, still chained beside the entrance where every visitor would see her. An embarrassment displayed for all outsiders to witness. A middle-aged woman stopped near the gate and frowned. Perhaps someone should move her before the royals arrive. Her companion shook his head. Pack Alpha Magnus ordered her punishment to continue until tomorrow morning. Even with royal guests coming? Especially with royal guests coming. The woman looked uncomfortable, but said nothing more. They walked away. Eloan lowered her eyes. She had spent years trying to earn acceptance. Years trying to prove she belonged. None of it mattered now. One rejection had erased everything. Somewhere beyond the square, music suddenly began. Soft at first, then louder. Festival musicians had arrived. Within minutes, tables were being arranged. Decorations appeared. Bright ribbons stretched between buildings. What had started as a punishment now felt like a celebration built around her humiliation. The contrast made her chest ache. Laughter echoed through the cold air. Villagers gathered cups of hot cider and shared stories while snow drifted gently from the sky. Eloan remained alone at the edge of it all. Then something unusual happened. A little girl no older than 8 approached the gate. She wore a red scarf wrapped twice around her neck and carried a small paper lantern. Eloan recognized her immediately. Nora Bell, the baker's daughter. The child hesitated before stepping closer. Miss Eloan? She asked softly. Eloan blinked in surprise. Hello, Nora. The girl glanced around nervously before pulling a small wrapped pastry from her coat pocket. I saved this from the bakery. Eloan's throat tightened. You should keep it. Nora shook her head. You look cold. Before Eloan could answer, an angry voice cut through the air. Nora. The child froze. Her father strode forward from the crowd. His expression darkened immediately. Come here. But Dad, she has not eaten. Now. Nora looked back at Eloan apologetically before obeying. The pastry slipped from her hands into the snow. Neither of them picked it up. Eloan watched them disappear into the crowd. For several seconds, she could not move. The small act of kindness somehow hurt more than the cruelty. because it reminded her what compassion looked like. The necklace pulsed again, stronger than ever. A faint silver glow escaped through the fabric of her coat. This time Aloan saw it clearly. Her breath caught. The light vanished almost instantly, but she knew she had not imagined it. Something was happening. Something impossible. Then the crowd suddenly fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the northern road. In the distance, beyond the falling snow, dozens of lights appeared between the trees. Torches, moving steadily closer. The royal procession had reached Raven Hollow. And as Aloan stared toward the approaching glow, the pendant against her heart became so warm it felt like a living star waiting to awaken. The torches appeared first, dozens of them moving through the forest like a river of gold cutting across the darkness. The moment the villagers spotted them, every conversation died. Laughter vanished. Music stopped. Even the winter wind seemed to quiet. Aloan Voss lifted her head slowly, snow clinging to her dark hair as she stared toward the northern road. The silver pendant beneath her coat pulsed against her chest. Once, twice, then faster, much faster. Something was coming. No, someone. The feeling settled deep inside her bones. Across the square, Pack Alpha Magnus Crow hurried forward, straightening his coat as panic flashed briefly across his face. An unannounced royal visit was rare. An unannounced visit in the middle of winter was almost unheard of. Villagers rushed to clear the road. Parents pulled children aside. Lantern light flickered across anxious faces as the procession finally emerged from the tree line. Massive black horses stepped onto the snowy road. Royal guards followed in perfect formation, their silver crests shining beneath the moonlight. Behind them came more riders, more banners, more torchlight. Yet Aloan barely noticed any of it, because something inside her suddenly froze. Hundreds of miles away, in another lifetime, perhaps she could have convinced herself it was imagination. But not now. Not when the pendant was practically burning against her skin. Not when every instinct she possessed screamed the same warning. The rider at the center of the procession entered the village. Alpha King Cashendraven. The moment his horse crossed beneath the outer lanterns, his wolf erupted inside him. Mine. The word slammed through his mind with enough force to steal the air from his lungs. Cashen's hands tightened around the reins. Mine. Again. Louder. More desperate. His wolf had faced rogues. Rival alphas. Territorial wars. Political betrayals. Never once had it lost control. Until now. The royal horse abruptly stopped. Snow shifted beneath its hooves. Several guards exchanged alarmed glances. They could feel it too. The pressure rolling off their king. The sudden surge of instinct. Cashen ignored them. His heartbeat thundered in his chest. Somewhere ahead. Somewhere close. The scent was impossible to miss now. Winter pine. Moonlit frost. And something ancient hidden beneath both. A scent he had never encountered before, yet somehow recognized instantly. His wolf surged again. Mine. Cashen slowly lifted his eyes. The village square stretched before him. Families. Merchants. Elders. Pack officials. None of them mattered. His gaze passed over every face without pause. Then he saw her. Time stopped. A young woman stood beside the gate. Snow covered her shoulders. Iron chains wrapped around her wrists. Her head remained lowered. Alone. Forgotten. Humiliated. Yet the instant Cashen saw her, every sound disappeared. The world narrowed until only she remained. Mine. His wolf was no longer asking. It was certain. The force of the recognition nearly staggered him. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because of the glowing pendant beneath her coat, though its silver light immediately caught his attention. No, it was the feeling. The impossible certainty that somewhere, somehow, fate had finally placed the missing piece of his life directly before him. Magnus Crow stepped forward with a practiced smile. Your Majesty, welcome to Raven Hollow. We are honored by your presence. Cashen never looked at him. Magnus hesitated. Confusion flickered across his face. Your Majesty? Still nothing. Cashen's entire focus remained fixed on the woman standing beside the gate. He noticed the snow gathering in her hair, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she instinctively tried to make herself smaller whenever people looked at her. Something tightened painfully inside his chest. Who chained her there? Why was she alone? Why did every instinct he possessed demand that he reach her immediately? The pendant beneath her coat suddenly flashed. A pulse of silver light escaped through the fabric. Gasps erupted throughout the village. Cashen's breath caught. The scent intensified. The bond intensified. Everything intensified. Mine. His wolf practically roared the word now. Cashin swung one leg over the saddle and dismounted before anyone could stop him. The crowd immediately parted. Royal guards stepped aside. Villagers backed away. Nobody understood what was happening. Neither did Aloan. She stared at him in stunned silence as he began crossing the snow-covered square. One step, then another. He ignored the welcoming committee, ignored the elders, ignored the pack alpha, ignored everyone except the woman standing beside the gate. By the time Cashin reached the halfway point, even the villagers sensed something extraordinary unfolding. Brielle Thornheart had gone completely pale. Magnus looked increasingly nervous. Aloan could barely breathe. The pendant against her chest now glowed brightly enough to illuminate the snow around her feet. Cashin stopped only a few yards away. Their eyes met. For one suspended moment, neither moved. Then the Alpha King took another step forward. And another. As if drawn by a force older than kingdoms, older than bloodlines, older than memory itself. The entire village watched in stunned silence as the most powerful Alpha in the kingdom walked past everyone who mattered and headed straight toward the woman they had spent years pretending did not matter at all. Aloan could feel every pair of eyes in Raven Hollow fixed on her. Yet somehow none of them mattered anymore. The only thing she could focus on was the Alpha King walking through the falling snow toward the gate. Step by step. Unhurried. Certain. As though the rest of the village had disappeared. The silver pendant beneath her coat pulsed so hard it felt like a second heartbeat. Warmth spread through her chest and down her arms. The chains around her wrists suddenly felt heavier than before. Not because they had changed. Because for the first time she realized someone important had finally seen them. Someone powerful enough to question why they were there. Cashin Draven stopped directly in front of her. Silence swallowed the village. Even the horses seemed unwilling to break it. Aloan slowly lifted her eyes. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. She had expected authority. She had expected intimidation. What she found instead was something she could not understand. Concern. Real concern. The kind nobody had shown her in years. Cashin's gaze moved from her face to the chains around her wrists. The temperature around them seemed to drop. Not because of magic. Because everyone nearby suddenly realized they might have made a terrible mistake. Magnus Crow stepped forward quickly. Your Majesty, allow me to explain. Cashin did not look away from Aloan. Explain what? The question was calm. Quiet. Yet the entire square seemed to freeze. Magnus cleared his throat. She violated pack expectations. Did she? Cashin asked. She was rejected. Murmurs spread through the crowd. The explanation sounded weaker the moment it was spoken aloud. Cashin finally turned his head toward Magnus. Rejected? Magnus nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. The king looked back at Aloan. Snowflakes rested in her dark hair. The chain links around her wrists reflected the lantern light. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he asked the question nobody else had bothered to ask. Are you injured? Aloan blinked in surprise. Of all the things she expected, it was not that. Not concern. Not kindness. She shook her head slowly. No, Your Majesty. The answer was only partly true. The wounds that hurt most could not be seen. Cashin studied her for another moment. Then something changed in his expression. His wolf stirred again. Mine. The word echoed through him with absolute certainty. Not ownership. Not possession. Recognition. The undeniable knowledge that fate had brought him here for a reason. Around them, several royal guards exchanged uneasy glances. They could feel the shift too. The bond. The pull. The ancient instinct every wolf understood. Cashin took one step closer. The silver pendant beneath Aloan's coat immediately flared brighter. Gasps erupted throughout the square. The glow spilled through the fabric, illuminating the snow around her feet. People backed away instinctively. Brielle Thornheart looked as though she might faint. Magnus looked alarmed. Aloan looked down at the light in disbelief. What is happening? She whispered. Cashin already knew. Or at least part of it. He slowly removed a leather cord from beneath his own cloak. Hanging from it was a silver crescent nearly identical to hers. The moment the two pendants faced one another, the glow intensified. The crowd erupted into whispers. Impossible. Look at the symbols. They are the same. Aloan stared at the matching pendant. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Memories of her mother flashed through her mind. The warning. The secrecy. The promise that one day the necklace would matter. Cashin looked from the pendant to Aloan. Then, in front of the entire village, he did something nobody expected. He lowered himself onto one knee. The square exploded into shocked silence. Magnus stared. Brielle stared. The villagers stared. Even Aloan forgot how to breathe. The Alpha King was kneeling before a rejected Omega. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. Cassian ignored the stunned reactions around him. His attention never left Aloan. "Look at me," he said gently. Her eyes met his. Snow drifted between them. Lantern light flickered across the silver glow surrounding the pendants. For the first time in years, Aloan felt seen. Not judged. Not dismissed. Seen. Cassian reached toward the chain around her wrist. He did not pull. He did not force. His fingers simply rested against the cold metal. "These chains do not belong on you." The words struck her harder than she expected. Because no one had ever questioned them before. No one had ever questioned any of it. The rejection. The punishment. The isolation. Cassian looked up at her again. The certainty in his eyes was unshakable now. "Someone lied to you about your worth, Aloan Voss." The village remained completely silent. "And before this night is over," he continued softly, "the truth is going to be heard by everyone." For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody even seemed willing to breathe. The sight before them felt impossible. The Alpha King remained on one knee in the snow while a rejected Omega stood frozen beside the packed gate. Every story the villagers believed about power, status, and worth suddenly felt uncertain. Aloan could barely process what was happening. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The silver pendant beneath her coat glowed brighter with every passing second, casting soft light across the snow. Yet even that was not what shocked her most. It was the way Cassian looked at her, as though she mattered, as though she always had. The king slowly rose to his feet. His gaze shifted toward the iron chains wrapped around her wrists. The warmth in his expression disappeared, not replaced by anger, replaced by something colder. Disappointment, the kind that made powerful people nervous. Cassian turned toward the crowd. "Who ordered this?" His voice was calm, quiet, yet it carried across the entire square. No one answered. The villagers exchanged uncertain looks. Some lowered their heads. Others suddenly found the snow very interesting. Cassian waited. Silence stretched longer. "I asked a question." Magnus Crow stepped forward reluctantly. "The decision was mine, Your Majesty." The king looked at him. "Why?" Magnus cleared his throat. "Pack law." "Which law?" Magnus hesitated. The hesitation said more than any explanation could. Cassian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Show me the law that requires a woman to stand alone in the snow because someone rejected her." More silence. Magnus had no answer. Because there was no such law. The villagers knew it. The elders knew it. Everyone knew it. For years they had hidden cruelty behind tradition. Hearing it spoken aloud suddenly made it sound ridiculous. Cassian turned back toward Aloan. Snowflakes settled softly across her shoulders. The royal cloak protected her from the worst of the cold, but it could not hide the exhaustion in her eyes. Years of rejection left marks no one else could see. The king gently touched one of the iron chains. "Remove them." Nobody moved. The command echoed through the square. Yet the villagers remained frozen. Not because they refused, because they could not believe what they were hearing. Cassian looked toward the nearest guard. The soldier immediately stepped forward. Before he could reach the chain, a sharp crack echoed through the night. Everyone jumped. One of the iron links had split apart on its own. Then another. Then another. The silver light from Aloan's pendant surged brighter. Gasps spread through the crowd. The chains loosened. Not violently. Not dramatically. Simply as though they no longer had any right to remain where they were. The final link slipped free and landed quietly in the snow. Aloan stared down at her wrists. For the first time in days, they were free. A strange feeling filled her chest. Relief. Disbelief. Hope. Emotions she had almost forgotten how to feel. Cassian never looked away from her. Aloan, hearing her name in his voice, felt different. Somehow important. She slowly lifted her eyes. "Yes, Your Majesty." The king stepped closer. The entire village watched. "Look at me." She did. "You are not rejected." The words struck her like a physical force. Her throat tightened immediately. "You are not abandoned." Tears filled her eyes. Around them, complete silence settled over Raven Hollow. Every villager listened. Every elder listened. Every guard listened. Cassian's voice remained steady, certain, unshakable. "The opinions of frightened people do not determine your worth." Aloan felt tears sliding down her cheeks. For years she had believed the opposite. For years she had allowed others to define her. The king reached out and gently took her hand. The moment their fingers touched, the silver pendant flared brilliantly. Soft light spread across the square. Snow sparkled like scattered stars. Murmurs erupted throughout the crowd. Cashin ignored them. His attention never left Aloan. You spent years being told where you belong. He paused. They were wrong. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone might hear it. The king's wolf settled completely for the first time since entering the village. The certainty was absolute now. Fate, bond, destiny. Whatever name history chose, the truth remained the same. Cashin looked directly into Aloan's eyes and spoke the words that changed everything. From this night forward, you stand under my protection. A stunned silence followed. Then he continued, and let every person here hear me clearly. The Alpha King turned toward the crowd without releasing her hand. No one will ever treat her as though she is unwanted again. The villagers stood motionless beneath the falling snow. Some looked ashamed. Others looked shocked. A few appeared close to tears. But none dared look away. Because for the first time, they were witnessing something far more powerful than punishment. They were witnessing a woman being chosen. Publicly. Completely. Without hesitation. And deep inside her heart, Aloan felt something she had not felt since childhood. She finally believed that her story was not ending at the gate. It was beginning there. The silence that followed felt almost sacred. Snow drifted through the lantern light while the villagers stood frozen in place, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Moments earlier, Aloan Voss had been the woman nobody wanted to acknowledge. Now she stood beside the Alpha King with his hand wrapped around hers while the entire village listened to his every word. Aloan's heart still raced. The warmth of the silver pendant spread steadily through her chest. Yet something had changed. For the first time in years, the warmth was no longer fighting loneliness. It was replacing it. Cashin slowly released her hand and turned toward the crowd. His expression remained calm, but nobody mistook that calmness for weakness. Every villager sensed the same thing. The king was not finished. Not even close. There is another reason I came to Raven Hollow, he said. The crowd immediately quieted again. Cashin reached into his cloak and removed the matching silver pendant. The ancient crescent reflected the moonlight. Gasps spread through the square. Side by side, the two symbols glowed with identical silver light. For 18 years, Cashin continued, the crown has searched for someone. Curiosity swept through the villagers. Even Magnus Crow looked unsettled. The king raised the pendant slightly. The last surviving descendant of House Lenara. The name moved through the crowd like a cold wind. Every wolf knew the stories. The lost bloodline. The vanished heirs. The family believed erased from history. Aloan felt her breath catch. Part of her already suspected where this conversation was leading. Another part was terrified to hear it spoken aloud. Cashin looked at her. Your mother never told you, did she? Aloan shook her head slowly. No, a shadow of sadness crossed the king's face. Then she carried the burden alone. He motioned toward one of the royal commanders. The officer immediately stepped forward carrying a leather case. Inside were old records, letters, and royal seals preserved for years. The commander handed one parchment to Cashin. The king unfolded it carefully. This record was filed 18 years ago. His eyes moved across the faded ink. It describes a woman named Lyra Lenara arriving at Raven Hollow under a false surname. A murmur swept through the villagers. Aloan felt her knees weaken. Lyra, her mother. Cashin continued. According to the report, she requested sanctuary for herself and her infant daughter. The square fell silent. Aloan could hear nothing except the pounding of her heart. Infant daughter. Her. The king looked directly at her. Your mother did not hide because she was ashamed. His voice softened. She hid because she was protecting you. Tears gathered instantly in Aloan's eyes. All her life, she had wondered why her mother avoided questions about the past. Why they rarely traveled. Why she always seemed nervous whenever strangers appeared. Suddenly those mysteries made sense. Lyra had not been running from her history. She had been protecting her daughter's future. Cashin folded the document carefully. House Lenara was never destroyed. He paused. It survived through you. A stunned silence followed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then whispers erupted across the village. Some looked shocked. Others looked overwhelmed. A few simply stared at Aloan as though seeing her for the first time. Because in many ways, they were. Aloan struggled to breathe. You are saying that her voice faltered. Cashin nodded. You are the last known heir of House Lenara. The words echoed through the square. Every insult, every rejection, every cruel label she had carried suddenly felt distant. Not erased, but powerless. They had never been the truth. Across the crowd, Brielle Thornhart lowered her head. Shame filled her expression. Magnus Crow looked years older than he had an hour earlier. Neither could meet Aloan's eyes. Cassian's gaze shifted toward Magnus. You knew enough to ask questions. His voice remained calm. But fear convinced you to bury the truth. Magnus lowered his head even further. His silence was all the confirmation anyone needed. The king turned back to Aloan. There is something else. The crowd quieted immediately. Cassian looked down at the two glowing pendants. Then back at her. The moment I crossed into Raven Hollow, my wolf recognized you. Aloan's pulse skipped. Around them, several royal guards exchanged knowing glances. The villagers leaned forward. Cassian's gaze never wavered. Not because of your bloodline. He paused. Not because of House Lenara. The entire square held its breath. A faint smile appeared on the king's face. Because fate did. The meaning settled over the crowd almost instantly. Gasps spread from one end of the village to the other. Aloan felt her heart stop, then start again, faster than ever. Cassian took a small step closer. You spent years believing nobody would ever choose you. Snow drifted softly around them. You were wrong. The silver glow surrounding the pendants brightened once more. Not with explosive power, with quiet certainty, like moonlight finally reaching a place hidden in darkness for far too long. Then, before the entire village, Cassian spoke words nobody would ever forget. The woman this pack rejected is the woman fate chose. Silence crashed over Raven Hollow. Aloan stared at him, unable to breathe. The king's expression never wavered. And I would cross every border in this kingdom to stand beside her. No one spoke. No one looked away. Because at that moment, every wolf in Raven Hollow finally understood the truth. Aloan Voss had never been the rejected Omega they believed her to be. She had been someone extraordinary all along. The only difference was that tonight, the entire kingdom had begun to see it. No one in Raven Hollow spoke for several seconds. Snow drifted quietly through the lantern light, while the villagers struggled to absorb everything they had just witnessed. The woman they had ignored. The woman they had judged. The woman they had chained at the gate. She was standing beside the Alpha King while the entire village listened to her story unfold. Aloan felt overwhelmed. Her mother's secrets. House Lenara. The ancient pendants. The impossible connection Cassian had spoken of. Part of her wanted answers. Part of her simply wanted a moment to breathe. Yet one thing had become clear. The shame she carried for years no longer belonged to her. Cassian slowly turned away from Aloan and faced the crowd. The warmth in his expression faded, replaced by the calm authority that had made kings, elders, and alphas respect him across the kingdom. Every villager instinctively straightened. They knew this moment mattered. The truth had been revealed. Now came the lesson. There is something every wolf here needs to understand, Cassian said. His voice carried effortlessly across the square. What happened tonight was never about bloodlines. The villagers exchanged uncertain glances. The king continued. Aloan's worth did not begin when you learned her mother's name. Silence settled heavily across the crowd. Her worth did not begin when the pendant glowed. Cassian's gaze moved across the villagers one by one. And it did not begin when I arrived. Several people lowered their heads. Others looked away, because they knew he was right. Aloan had been the same person yesterday. The same person last year. The same person her entire life. The only thing that changed was what others believed about her. Cassian turned toward Magnus Crow. You knew enough to question the story. Magnus lowered his eyes. Yes, your majesty. Yet fear was easier than truth. Magnus said nothing. His silence answered for him. The king looked toward the rest of the village. And how many others saw what was happening and chose to remain silent? Nobody answered. Nobody could. Aloan recognized many faces in the crowd. People who once smiled at her. People who stopped. Shopkeepers. Neighbors. Friends she thought she had. None of them had placed the chains around her wrists. Yet very few had spoken when it happened. Cassian nodded slowly. Most cruelty survives because good people convince themselves it is someone else's responsibility. The words landed harder than anger ever could. A few villagers wiped tears from their eyes. Others stared at the snow. For the first time, Raven Hollow was confronting its own reflection. Cassian turned back toward Aloan. Snowflakes rested on the royal cloak draped around her shoulders. The silver pendant glowed softly beneath the fabric. You spent years carrying burdens that were never yours. His voice softened. You carried their doubts. Aloan felt emotion tighten her throat. You carried their judgment. Her eyes filled with tears. And you carried their rejection. The king took a step closer. No more. Complete silence followed. Then Cashin did something that would be remembered for generations. He extended his hand toward Aloan and looked directly at the villagers. Let every wolf here hear me. His voice remained calm, but the authority behind it was absolute. Every head lifted. Every eye focused on him. Cashin's gaze never left Aloan. The woman this pack rejected is the woman I choose. A collective gasp swept through Raven Hollow. Aloan froze. The villagers stared in stunned silence. Even the royal guards looked pleased by the declaration. The king continued. The woman they left standing alone is the woman who stands beside me. Tears slipped down Aloan's cheeks. She could not stop them. Years of loneliness seemed to unravel all at once. Cashin held out his hand a little farther. And as long as I draw breath, she will never stand alone again. No one spoke. No one dared interrupt. The moment was too powerful, too honest, too real. Aloan looked at the hand extended toward her. The same hand that had reached for her when she believed nobody else would. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The silver pendant responded instantly. Soft moonlit radiance spread across the square, illuminating the falling snow around them. Villagers watched in silence. Some smiled through tears. Others lowered their heads respectfully. For the first time in her life, Aloan felt something stronger than acceptance. She felt chosen. Not because of her bloodline. Not because of destiny. Because someone had seen her at her lowest point and still stepped forward without hesitation. And as the winter moon shone above Raven Hollow, every wolf present understood they were witnessing something far more powerful than a royal revelation. They were witnessing the moment a forgotten woman finally found where she belonged. The village remained silent long after Cashin's words settled over the square. Snow drifted gently through the night, covering the roads, rooftops, and fields of Raven Hollow in silver. Yet for Aloan, the world felt brighter than it ever had before. Not because the village had changed. Not because secrets had been revealed. Because for the first time in her life, she no longer felt invisible. She stood beside the Alpha King with her hand resting in his while hundreds of villagers watched. The same villagers who once looked through her now looked at her differently. Some with regret. Some with respect. Many with understanding. Aloan glanced across the crowd and spotted Norabelle standing beside her parents. The little girl smiled and gave a small wave. This time her father smiled too. Aloan felt warmth spread through her chest. It was a small moment, but somehow it meant everything. Because it felt real. Cashin quietly observed the exchange. Then his gaze shifted toward the gate standing at the edge of the village. The same gate where Aloan had spent days alone. The same gate where she believed her future had ended. Come with me, he said softly. Aloan nodded. Together they walked through the snow-covered square. The villagers stepped aside without being asked. A clear path opened before them. No one spoke. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. The journey was short, but every step felt symbolic. Aloan could still remember the hopelessness she felt standing there earlier that evening. The loneliness, the humiliation, the certainty that no one was coming for her. Now everything was different. When they reached the gate, they stopped. Snow had already covered the ground where the broken chains had fallen. Nature was quietly erasing the last visible signs of what had happened. Aloan stared at the wooden structure for several moments. Then she smiled. Not because the memory no longer hurt. Because the memory no longer controlled her. Cashin stood beside her. What do you see? He asked. Aloan considered the question carefully. A place I thought would define the rest of my life. Her voice was calm. But now it feels small. The king nodded. Because you finally see beyond it. She looked at him. I spent years trying to earn acceptance from people who had already decided who I was. Snowflakes drifted between them. I kept thinking if I worked harder, smiled more, endured longer, eventually they would choose me. Her eyes lowered briefly. They never did. Cashin's expression softened. Some people only recognize value after someone else points it out to them. Aloan laughed quietly. That sounds painfully accurate. The king smiled. Then his gaze turned toward the horizon where the royal convoy waited beneath the moonlight. The road stretched into the distance, disappearing beyond snowy hills and dark forests. A future waiting to be explored. What happens now? Aloan asked. Cashin looked at her as though the answer was obvious. Now you stop asking permission to exist. The words settled deep inside her heart. She felt tears gathering once more. Not from sadness. From freedom. For years she had allowed other people to decide how much space she deserved in the world. How much kindness she deserved. How much respect she deserved. Tonight that ended. The silver pendant beneath her coat glowed softly. Not with urgency. Not with power. With peace. Aloan looked up at the winter sky. Somewhere beyond the clouds, she imagined her mother watching. For the first time, the memory did not bring grief. It brought gratitude. Lyra had protected her, believed in her, loved her enough to carry impossible burdens. Everything Aloan had tonight began with that sacrifice. She knew, did not she? Aloan whispered. My mother knew I would survive. Cassian followed her gaze upward. I think she knew much more than that. Aloan smiled through her tears. The king then extended his hand once more. The same hand that reached for her when she stood alone. The same hand that had shattered years of doubt with a few simple words. This time there was no hesitation. Aloan placed her hand in his immediately. Cassian's expression warmed. He turned toward the villagers who still watched from the square. Then, in a voice clear enough for every wolf in Raven Hollow to hear, he spoke one final time. Let this night be remembered. Silence spread across the village. The woman you rejected is the woman I chose. A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. Some smiled. Others lowered their heads. A few wiped away tears. Cassian looked at Aloan. And wherever I go, she walks beside me. Aloan's breath caught. The words carried no hesitation. No uncertainty. Only truth. The king offered a small smile. Come home, Aloan. The simple invitation nearly broke her heart in the best possible way. Home. Not a title. Not a throne. Not a destiny. Home. The thing she had wanted all along. Together they turned away from the gate and began walking toward the moonlit road. The villagers watched them leave. The snow continued to fall. And for the first time since her mother's death, Aloan Voss was not walking toward the unknown alone. She was walking toward a future where she was seen, valued, protected, and chosen. The gate behind her disappeared beneath the falling snow. The chapter of rejection was over. The chapter of belonging had finally begun.